Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. We're coming to you today from the Detroit Historical Museum, where a really anticipated exhibition of the 1967 Detroit Uprising has just opened. We'll get the details on that exhibit a little later in the program, but we start with a look at education in Detroit. It's been a month since Dr. Nikolai Vitti officially began his new role as superintendent for Detroit Public Schools Community District. I'm pleased to have Dr. Vitti as my guest today. Welcome to American Black Journal.
Thank you for having me.
And welcome home to Detroit.
Thank you. It's great to be home.
Yeah. So a month. Tell me what you've seen in a month and tell me what it tells you about the challenges you faced. Is it what you expected? Is it worse than you expected? Or is it maybe a little better than what you expected?
I would say a combination of everything.
All of those things?
All of those things. I think what has excited me the most is the potential that the school system has, especially in alignment with the resurgence of the city itself economically. So I just, in talking to principals, talking to teachers, and more importantly, talking to students, you see that we're on the verge of aligning the work that has to happen in the school district with the economic development. And there's a sense of energy and willingness to do things differently. In other districts, schools that I've walked into as an agent of change, there's sometimes a lot of resistance, and I think that's going to happen. So I don't want to give the impression that no one's going to push back on change. But what I can tell you is that there's a recognition that we need to do things differently to do right by children.
A week ago, you tweeted about the idea of an event to commemorate like a special teacher of the year here in the district. I retweeted you. That brings up the whole idea of teachers and how we think of them, how we treat them here in the city. Also brings up the idea that we don't have enough teachers in Detroit public schools. Talk a little about those issues.
Well, there's no employee in our school district that's more important than teachers, period. They're working with children every day. They determine whether a child reaches their academic or civic potential. And one thing that I've been looking at when you ask what do we need to do differently is changing the culture of central office to directly support schools, namely classroom teachers and principals. So we're at a point where we need to change the entire culture with how we recognize teachers, with the great work that they do on an everyday basis, how we highlight individual teachers for going above and beyond as far as how they're moving student performance. That comes from just simple recognition, but it also comes with pay. So we, at this point, have a tentative agreement on an initial contract. That's just recognizing that pay is important and that there needs to be at least a bump at this point, but it doesn't define where we need to end as far as teacher salary. So we're going to see initial bump, but I commit long term, especially with an increase in enrollment, to move teacher pay above the suburban pay. And a lot of people are saying, are you crazy? How can you say that in the fiscal situation that Detroit's in right now? We're a stable district as far as finances is concerned, but I think once we see an increase in enrollment, once I have time to dissect the budget, it's about priorities, and our priority has to be to increase teacher pay, but it also has to create a different learning environment and work environment for our teachers. So class size has to be addressed, better curriculum has to be addressed, dealing with discipline issues has to be addressed with a differentiated approach to discipline in alternative schools. So all of those, and a central office that is dedicated directly and indirectly to serving schools, teachers, and principals. I'm going to go through a reorganization in about a week, and we're going to be a bit thinner on the administrative side, which will generate revenue, but the message will be clear that everyone directly or indirectly has to support schools.
Should be supporting the kids. Talk about the teacher shortage. Can you get people to fill those spots? And if you do, does it throw the budget out of whack? The budget is balanced this year largely because we're not paying those teachers. What's the interplay there?
Well, there's a couple things going on. One is pay and work conditions. And so that speaks to some of the points I made earlier. But one of our main priorities going into this fall is to be fully staffed. And we have to have that mentality. We have to have that sense of urgency. I think there's a story to be told and to be pitched to potential teachers about coming to Detroit. I think every teacher enters the profession to try to maximize students' potential. And when you look at potential and untapped potential, I don't think you can go anywhere better than Detroit to do that work. Yeah. We just have to create the right financial package and then create a working environment that's ideal for those teachers. So I think the structure, the story, the pitch, if you will, is there. We just have to change the culture and status of the work environment.
And you can do that and stay within the budgetary constraints?
Yeah, because I think it's about priorities. Yeah. And so one thing that we're going to do is create a strategic plan. That'll be a community engagement process, one where the board will be heavily involved. We defined our strategic plan. Obviously, a focus on developing teachers and recruiting teachers will be central to that. And then your budget is driven by that strategic plan and align. And so salaries, positions have to be at the forefront. And then there's things that we can do structurally to generate revenue for salaries and for teacher positions to balance the budget. For example, we've got a lot of teachers out of the classroom at the district level and school level that'll help the vacancy issue and the budget.
Yeah. One of the things that's been true for a long time here in Detroit is that we have great sort of single examples of the way the district ought to look, right? Cass Tech, Renaissance, Chrysler Elementary, which now is going to become a Montessori. It feels like we have never taken advantage of those models to try to scale up, to try to say, well, we're doing this here, why can't we do the same thing somewhere else, or a similar thing somewhere else that lifts the overall performance of the district?
Well, I think I agree with you. It's about replicating those best practices in those schools, but what is sometimes unique in those schools is expectations. And that's one thing that I think is probably our greatest challenge right now as a school district, is we have to increase the level of expectation.
Think better of what we want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we have to stop having this conversation that it's all right for these students. It's all of our students, and every student has to be worked with a sense of urgency. And the question that I'm going to always ask is it good enough for your child? So whether you're a district administrator, you're a principal, you're a teacher, you're a custodian, you're an office worker, if you are doing something that in some ways not the right thing for your own child, your flesh and blood, then it's not good for someone else's child. Yeah. And that's about expectations. So if we're going to have high expectations at CAS, we have to have high expectations at Western. Wherever we are, we treat children like they're our own.
Yeah. We have been arguing about how much money Detroit Public Schools need, how much money Detroit Public Schools have in this community for decades, really since I was a child here in the 70s. Do we have enough now? Are we prioritizing schools the way we should, or should we be still looking for a better way to get more cash into those coffers?
Yeah, I think that the answer to that question is twofold. On the one hand, I do think we can be more efficient and strategic with the dollars that we have. So that's why, as I've started to meet with the business community, I've said I'm not going to make an ask yet, because I want to show you that we're being as strategic and efficient with our resources. So that goes back to aligning the budget with the strategic plan and our priorities. Once we do that, we know that there are going to be gaps because our children bring an enormous need to the schools. Yeah. And so I would say we need a private gap filling solution. And the state also has to recognize that when you educate a child in Detroit, that per pupil expenditure is naturally going to be higher than Northville or Garden City or any other district.
And that's an argument we're still trying to have. I mean, I'm not sure everybody in Lansing agrees with you.
Well, I mean, then they should walk into our schools and do home visits and actually talk to our kids and our parents and see the reality of poverty. And then they'll understand that when you are giving the dollar amount the same as Detroit as a suburban district, it may look like it's equal, but it's not fair.
Yeah, yeah. Have you had a chance to talk to members of our legislature yet about what's going on in Detroit schools?
At a broad level, when I was in Mackinac.
Mackinac,
there were broad conversations, but not specific conversations. To your question and to my earlier point, I think that's why we need to move to a weighted formula that recognizes poverty, that recognizes ESE status or English language learner status. Yeah. Some of that is in the Michigan funding formula, but it's not deep and it's not wide enough. So those are conversations that I'll be having. But I want to go beyond just conversations. I want to actually show data that indicates what we're receiving, the gaps that exist. Right. I mean, even when you look at ESE children, we're educating a larger proportion than other districts,
yes,
but technically receiving the same amount of money with a bit of an increase from IDA at the federal level, but nowhere where it needs to be.
Right. I want to talk somewhat about students with disabilities. You were a student who faced some challenges as a young person. We've done an awful job in Detroit dealing with those children and their issues for a long time. Tell me what you've seen in the early days.
Yeah, I would go one step farther to say we've done an awful job nationally in this country with teaching children with disabilities. And then when you look at the concentration of poverty coupled with ESE status in Detroit, then those bad systems nationally are exacerbated because of all the other issues that we're trying to deal with.
Effect,
Correct. So we have a lot of work to do nationally, but I would say in Detroit as well. I think that starts with just having the right team at the district level that has the right vision, that can create the systems, the structure of support and accountability, and then training for teachers, extra resources for teachers, and thinking differently about schools. I think it's okay to have a conversation of how we go deeper with certain disabilities at certain specialized schools. I think the opportunity when we look at branding our district, short-term, long-term, is to create specialized schools, not to isolate students with disabilities, but to go deeper. I've done that with dyslexic students, you know, being a dyslexic and two of my children being dyslexic, but even students with autism and other needs. I think Detroit can do that better and differently than even the suburbs, and that's one way I think we can attract parents to our school system.
Yeah. Quickly, I want to ask you about charter schools. That's another debate we've had in this community now for 20 years. The public schools don't really have a level playing field to compete with charter schools. They play by different rules. You have said that you want to sort of compete with them and beat them, right? Get more kids into the public schools. But can you do that without some changes to the way that we manage all that? We had a big argument about it last summer. We lost the opportunity to put them under a system that would be similar to public schools. Do we need that for you to be successful?
I think it would help. So that goes back to the policy infrastructure that has to be structured the right way in order to implement reform and accountability. But it's interesting when you frame it as debate. I don't think we should be debating this issue any longer. You know, Detroit has been an incubator, testing ground, guinea pig for years, and we know that charter schools at scale,
not panning out the way they said
charter
they would.
Schools at scale as a reform strategy has not worked in Detroit. In fact, it's worked nowhere. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some good charter schools. And if parents are going there and they feel like that's the right option for their children, then so be it. But at scale, it's not working and it won't work. And we have to be able to talk about that with transparency and a bit of clarity and strategy. And that's where I think our lobbying efforts have to improve at the district level, city level, to say we need the right authorization process. Children are not guinea pigs.
They're not an experiment.
And
we know it works.
And again, it's not a matter of, well, we have to do things differently. That's always been the rationale, the justification. We now know it doesn't work. So how do we create the right guardrails and accountability structure so that we don't have a random process of creating schools? You know, creating a school is not the same as saying that I'm going to be a venture entrepreneur and create a gas station down the street. This is where children go every day in order to receive the skills and knowledge to do better than their parents. And in our poorest neighborhoods, we can't experiment. We need best practice, we need the best teachers, best leaders to do right by children, and that's not happening right now.
Okay, Dr. Nikolai Vitti, welcome back to Detroit again.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
See you soon.
Thank you.